Good morning and welcome to NFL Fantasy Game Day presented by Geico. I am Adam Rank. That is Kimmy Checks. That is Marcus Grant way over there. And Kim, how you living?
I'm so good. It's Sunday. There's football on. My fiance and I woke up at 6 a.m. today because we're doing an all-day pulled pork situation because last week we attempted to make Kansas City-style barbecue ribs and then the Chiefs lost. So we're never doing that again. Now we're moving on to pulled pork. So hopefully we get a Chiefs win tomorrow and we have a good dinner today. But Marcus, how are you?
I'm good. You know, I know this is a football show, but I got baseball on the brain because the Dodgers forced a Game 7 in the NLCS. So we're all thinking blue, just like the board says behind me. I know the Rays have already gotten through there, so we'll see what happens. But yeah, football, it's great. It's exciting. I started a pot of chili that I'm going to have this afternoon. Let's go. Let's get this done.
Oh, Marcus, nobody cares. I live in Southern California. Nobody cares about the Dodgers. The Lakers won. Nobody's worried about baseball. It's about the Rams now. There's a lot of cool stuff going on. But you know what? You can hit us up with any fantasy questions on Twitter at NFL Fantasy, or if you're watching the show on YouTube at youtube.com/NFL. Our own friend, our pal, Michael F. Florio is there answering all of your questions in the chat function. So there he is, looking pretty good in his floral shirt. The only thing I ask, be polite. Florio is a friend of mine, and he is trying to do his best. But we do have a little bit of league news here, and it's good news, and it was tweeted out this morning by our own Tom Pelissaro. All Week 6 games are on schedule. No new positives across the league. Play football. Everyone is in, well, except for the 4 teams that are on a bye this week. The Seahawks, the Chargers, the Raiders, and the Saints. Everybody, it seems, on the West Coast, except for the Rams and 49ers, who will be playing the Sunday night game on NBC. But, you know, we'll have some plug and play. Listen, I had Justin Herbert. I got to find a new quarterback. But let's talk about some must-starts for this week. And, Marcus, you will go ahead and kick that off.
Well, let's kick it off with DeAndre Hopkins. I mean, we were worried at the start of the year about whether or not his targets were going to decrease from his time in Houston. That hasn't been the case at all. He's seen just as many targets as he did when he was playing with the Texans. He has been the only Cardinals receiver you can trust. So you know you're starting him anyway, but this week is a particularly great matchup because he's got the Dallas Cowboys, who are giving up the 3rd most fantasy points per game to wide receivers. You know he's going to get targets. He's going to have a chance to eat up this defense. It is one of the 2 Monday night games, but look for a big week from Nuke, I think.
DeAndre Hopkins and Kyler Murray, one of my favorite quarterback receiver stacks of this week. But I want to move over to the running back position and talk about Ronald Jones, who I think has an incredible matchup against the Green Bay Packers that have allowed a top 12 running back in 3 of 4 games and have also allowed the 2nd most fantasy points per game to running backs, just around 35 fantasy points. Now, because this is an afternoon game, we don't know for certain, but it is being reported right now that both Chris Evans and Leonard Fournette are going to play. However, I do not think Leonard Fournette being active is going to impact Ronald Jones. I'm still on this Rojo train, and I'm going to keep on going ahead and doing it because Rojo has had 15-plus fantasy points in consecutive weeks, along with 100-plus rushing yards in consecutive weeks. I really hope good things are in store for Ronald Jones in this game tonight.
That's so spicy. We can't get you to hedge off Ronald Jones. We're like, Kim, leave the table. You're like, nope, I'm doubling down. But you know what? I love it. I love the moxie. And I love Adam Thielen this week. 26 fantasy points in consecutive weeks. He leads the NFL, or he's tied with Mike Evans with 6 receiving touchdowns on the season. And this week he's got the Atlanta Falcons, who've allowed the most points per game to wide receivers. They've allowed the 2nd most receiving yards per game to wide receivers. Wideouts are averaging 3 receiving touchdowns per game against the Falcons, so this should be pretty good for Adam Thielen and Justin Jefferson. Now, let's take a look at the injury board, if we can fly that one, Hytham. Thank you so much. Now, speaking of the Vikings, Dalvin Cook is going to be out this week. Of course, Alexander Mattison expected to get the start and get the most production, or at least the most touches in that offense. Another running back of note, Melvin Gordon did not make the trip. He is not going to play this week against the New England Patriots, but Phillip Lindsay is back. I would not hesitate to get him back into your lineup. Noah Fant also going to be out, so go look at Irv Smith Jr. Some big-name wide receivers will be playing this week. OBJ, DJ Chark, although that's more of a thing for Gardner Minshew. But Julio Jones is going to be active, and you think about Julio, Devontae Adams expected to play. Kim mentioned a moment ago, Chris Godwin expected to play as well. Let's talk about Julio, though, because before he left with his injuries, he wasn't being very productive. So, Marcus, let me ask you, do you trust him? Is he somebody you're like automatically putting back out into your lineup?
Do I trust him? No. But am I starting him? Yes. I have this dilemma in one of my leagues. Like, the thing about Julio is we have seen plenty of times where he's gone out there and been less than 100%. And I know he doesn't have an injury designation, but the Falcons have been very careful with him because of this hamstring issue. We have seen in the past where he's less than 100% and he's been on the field and he's basically been a decoy. But because the ceiling is so high for Julio Jones on a week-to-week basis, it's hard to put him on the bench. So I'm not 100% trusting of this hamstring and what this means for him. But if I left him on the bench and he has one of those classic Julio games, I'll be kicking myself for a while.
Don't do it. It's funny. I was in this exact situation where I had Julio in my lineup, but then, in the NFL Fantasy app, you can see the circle around his head and then the player story and saying, hey, he's going to be active. Do you trust him? Do you not trust him? I absolutely trust Julio Jones because, like you said, Marcus, you have him on the bench and then he goes out and he puts up 30 points. Going up against the Vikings, these are both quarterbacks who like to throw the deep balls. I think they're going to have their receivers active in the game. So all signs point to Julio Jones, hopefully as long as he's healthy, having a productive one.
Well, Kimmy, you talk about the quarterbacks wanting to put the ball into the air in this contest. What about the running back situation? Because obviously with Dalvin Cook out, Alexander Mattison is expected to be the number one guy there. Are you getting him into your lineup?
I am. And you can't just say Alexander Mattison. You have to do it how Marcus Grant does it. It has to be Alexander Mattison. And now if you're watching, you're going to have that stuck in your head all day like me because it's Marcus Grant's fault. Anyway, okay, let me focus. I am actually going to put him in my lineup, especially because of those 4 teams that are on a bye. I have a ton of shares of Alvin Kamara at the running back position. Obviously, he is not playing. And Alexander Mattison, he's been great all season, and he was even great last season. That's something that we have to remember. Even when Dalvin Cook is in the game, Alexander Mattison is still getting production. They're going up against the Falcons, like we said, who are giving up the 8th most fantasy points to the running back position. That's approximately 29 fantasy points per game. So with Dalvin Cook out, I absolutely think that Alexander Mattison is a good plug and play.
At the start of the season, we talked about kind of setting up for a COVID year. We talked about expanding rosters and making sure you grab the backup for your top running back. And it was like the textbook example we used was if you draft Dalvin Cook, go get Alexander Mattison. And there was even some thought that maybe he'd have a standalone role in this offense. That hasn't really been the case, but I think what we saw from him last week and what I expect we're going to see from him this week, because I do think a big game is coming, is just going to reinforce the fact that he is worth having on your roster just because we know Dalvin Cook's injury history. He's sort of broken the injury seal so far this year. So it's worth having Alexander Mattison around because this might not be the last time he gets a feature role in a particular week.
And I wouldn't be afraid to go out and add Mike Boone if you get an opportunity as well. Somebody else who was on that injury board, Deontay Johnson, him missing time last week led to a huge game by Chase Claypool. So, Marcus, let me ask you, is Chase Claypool an obvious start this week?
I think he is a start. I think it sort of depends on what you have because I've gotten a few questions about him, and it really does depend on who the other receivers are you are cycling through. But he is going to get some more opportunities because Deontay Johnson isn't there. We know Ben Roethlisberger loves throwing to his outside receivers. I have seen the comparison. Somebody said he's like Gronk but faster, which I think is more a reference to his strength and his ability to kind of muscle smaller defensive backs and get open. The one thing I would say is that I have a feeling this might end up being a big game for Juju Smith-Schuster because the Browns really struggle against slot receivers, and Juju has been fairly quiet since week 1. But if you need some help at wide receiver, Chase Claypool, I think, is going to see a lot of targets today.
I was just going to say, and this is a question opposed to the both of you guys, what do you think Juju's production is going to be, and does that hurt or does that help Chase Claypool? Because I have shares of Juju, and if you look at his performance last week, I think he had, 6 fantasy points? I'm just quoting this off the top of my head. Don't want to say that in fact, but he didn't even look like the Juju that we knew in week 1 when he kind of had that breakout performance. So I think, what we saw from Chase Claypool last week went and showed that Ben Roethlisberger trusts this guy. He got in the end zone 4 different times. He broke all types of rookie numbers. But I'm just interested to see, with Deontay Johnson still out, is this going to continue to be a Chase Claypool game, or is Juju finally going to step back up?
And if you caught me, you know what? I'm still answering questions. My friends don't realize that I'm doing a show right now. Mike, Yes, start David Montgomery over Myles Gaskin, okay? Anybody else? Like, you can just watch the show. Because right now, we're going to do something special. It's time for 15 for 15, presented by Geico, which means we're dishing out our top 15 starts of the week. Really what it is my stardom from, my stardom sit-em column. Let's hit the board of my stardom quarterbacks. If we could, please height them. Can we check that out? Ryan Fitzpatrick, Matthew Stafford going up against my friends down in Duval, Deshaun Watson, Kirk Cousins, and you know what? I'm not afraid to start Jared Goff. Marcus, why don't you lead us off? You're allowed to take one of these guys. You can go off menu like you normally do. What do you got for me?
I am. I'm going to ask for the chef special, which is Cam Newton this week. And he's back. He's been activated off the COVID-19 list. He showed up to the stadium with a really special, fiery outfit. So that means he's really going to ball out this week. I mean, you should have seen his hat. Just go on Twitter. It's amazing. But on top of it, he's got a really good matchup against the Broncos, who are giving up a lot of fantasy points to quarterbacks, in part because they just aren't getting a lot of pressure on QBs. And we've seen earlier this year, if you give Cam time to just sit back in the pocket and make plays like he did against the Seahawks, he's going to pick you apart. So Cam's going to be out there. He's going to be playing. Maybe he even runs in a touchdown or two. This is a good week to have him back in your lineup.
I was just going to say, now that Cam Newton is back, we can expect some Cam Newton in the end zone, just like these B-rolls are showing us right there. But I want to go on menu and back to Adam Rink's stardom board and talk about Ryan Fitzpatrick going up against the Jets. I want to put some respect on his name because we still get questions on Twitter. Should I start Ryan Fitzpatrick this week versus another quarterback? You are absolutely starting Ryan Fitzpatrick because since week 2, he is the 6th fantasy quarterback, averaging almost 25 fantasy points per game. He's had 21 plus fantasy points in 4 straight games. This is the first time in his career. In his career, also, he's played 161 games. Crazy stats. He's been around a really long time. But in the last 3 of 4 games, he has had 2+ passing touchdowns. And especially going up today against the New York Jets, they are allowing 274 passing yards per game this season. That's tied for the 10th most in the NFL. And they're also allowing 32 fantasy points per game to quarterbacks. That's tied for the 2nd most in the league. So just looking at the stats alone, Ryan Fitzpatrick is a must start and is going to ball out this week.
Yeah, I love that. Let's take a look at the running back board. David Montgomery, Miles Sanders. Even though it's a tough matchup against the Baltimore Ravens, sometimes you have to play good running backs in a tough matchup. Oh, look, it's Kareem Hunt, Antonio Gibson, Myles Gaskin. But Kimmy, again, I got to go. You got to help out my friend Mike. Tell him why we're starting David Montgomery this week.
Mike, we are starting David Montgomery because Adam Rink is a Bears fan. That's the reason why. No, I'm just kidding. We're starting David Montgomery this week. He really does have a favorable matchup against the Panthers that are allowing the most fantasy points to running backs this season. Now, last week when we were talking about the Panthers, their defense is really good against quarterbacks. Against running backs, not so much. They're also allowing the most scrimmage touchdowns to running backs this season. They've allowed 9. Now, another thing is Tariq Cohen is out for the season, which goes ahead and boosts the stock of David Montgomery. He's seen 6+ targets in 2 straight games, and he's run 33 routes a game without Tariq Cohen in that offense. So I absolutely think this is going to be a monster game for David Montgomery.
That pass catching has really boosted Montgomery's value since Tariq Cohen's been out. Love to see it. I also love to see Antonio Gibson this week because he's starting to see more targets as well. Has been a bigger part of the passing game in back-to-back weeks. And he gets a Giants defense this week that has been bottom 12 when it comes to stopping fantasy running backs. Throw in the fact that now you got Kyle Allen at quarterback. We might even see Alex Smith depending on how things shake out. That means I expect that Washington's going to throw a lot more shorter passes, just kind of work the ball underneath. That works well for Gibson, who's going to be running those shorter routes. So he's starting to emerge. He's starting to kind of be the guy we thought he would be in the preseason. And this is a good week to have him at least as a flex.
All right, let's take a look at our wide receiver board. If we can fly that one, Hytham, thank you so much. Jamison Crowder, Terry McLaurin, which I'm really starting to hedge off that one. We can talk about Terry McLaurin a little bit later. Like I said these things on Tuesday, and then I take a lot of time, and you're like, James Bradbury's there. So we'll talk about Terry McLaurin later on in the show. That's scrolling on the show on the network, which I'm really stoked about. Justin Jefferson, Darius Slayton, Michael Gallup. Marcus, I know you talked about Juju a moment ago, but hit us one more time. Tell us why we love him this week.
We love him this week because the Browns are not good against slot receivers. I mean, they have given up the most yards, tied for the most touchdowns, I believe, against slot receivers so far this season. And you just feel like they're going to get Juju back involved. You heard a lot of quotes coming out of Pittsburgh this past week about how Juju has been patient, how he's been selfless, and that's allowed other guys like Deontay Johnson and Chase Claypool to really emerge. So this feels like a week that maybe they're going to start to reward him. You know, usually when you hear players or teams talk about how a guy has been so selfless and how he's really sacrificed his opportunities for the team, this is when you take your workhorse and you feed him a couple of sugar cubes, make him feel better about himself. And so I think this is the week that Juju Smith-Schuster gets a little bit of sugar to help him stay productive later in the year.
Marcus, I'm holding you to that because I have Juju in a few of my leagues, and I really need him to ball out and perform so I can get a dub this week. But I want to talk about Michael Gallup, and this may be a little bit spicy, but I honestly like Michael Gallup as a receiver over Amari Cooper this week, which I know is kind of crazy. One, it's a really good matchup against the Arizona Cardinals, who have allowed a top 15 fantasy wide receiver in 2 straight games, and they've also allowed a top 24 fantasy wide receiver in 4 straight games. I think CeeDee Lamb is going to be able to do that. I also think Michael Gallup is going to be able to do that. Now, this will be the very first game where Andy Dalton is the starting quarterback for the Dallas Cowboys. And this is where people were like, oh, no, maybe Michael Gallup is going to lose opportunity. That's absolutely not true. If you're looking at the B-roll and the video that's on the screen right now, last week, once Andy Dalton was in the game, when they were playing last week, he threw the ball to Michael Gallup in those must-catch situations, showing that he absolutely trusts him as a receiver. Because of that, I think Michael Gallup's shares and his targets are going to go up this week. So I really like him against the Cardinals.
Yeah, every catch right there seems like a highlight reel catch. And let's take a look right now at my tight ends. Robert Tonyan, I don't think this is a fluke. Now, there's a chance that with Devontae Adams back, he's not going to catch 3 touchdowns this week, but I think that's a pretty good opportunity for him. I like Ingram. I like Zach Ertz. I know a tough matchup once again, but they've allowed the Ravens have allowed some production to the tight end position. Jimmy Graham, Mike Gesicki, also good starts. Also, I would throw out there too, because Noah Fant is out this week. That was a late scratch. And if you need a tight end, Irv Smith Jr. is somebody who's available in just about every league. And that was 15 for 15 presented by Geico. Coming up, just like Alfred said to Bruce Wayne, why did we fall? So we can pick ourselves up again. I don't know why I think Russell Brand was playing Alfred, but we're going to be talking our favorite bounce back candidate. Although Russell Brand would be great as Alfred. Also, wouldn't he? Hello, Bruce Wayne, this is why you got to do this. No, I don't know. Anyways, let's take a look at Odell Beckham Jr. getting ready here. Tough matchup against the Pittsburgh Steelers. You're watching NFL Fantasy Game Day presented by Geico. One person's fight is never one person's fight. It takes all of us to fight cancer. Join the NFL and the American Cancer Society in the fight today by talking to your doctor or reminding a loved one about getting screened. Visit NFL.com/crucialcatch to learn more. Welcome back to NFL Fantasy Game Day presented by Geico. We are rolling along, getting you ready here for Week 6. No games in the book. It's kind of a unique situation, no Thursday night game. It's weird not being in a 30-point hole already. And but still, you might have some questions, and go ahead and hit us up on Twitter at NFL Fantasy. Of course, if you're watching us on YouTube at youtube.com/NFL, our Michael F. Florio is answering questions, but we're not going to let him have all the fun. Oh, no. We're going to take three fan questions right now. And John wants to know, do I start Laviska Shenault or stick with CeeDee Lamb? Kimmy, what are you doing here?
I'm going to stick with CeeDee Lamb. I was just talking about before the break, about Michael Gallup and how good I think this receiving core is going to be this week. So I would stick with Lamb, especially because DJ Chark, he is back, he's healthy, so then I could see some of those targets being split off.
All right, Baker Mayfield. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to laugh at that. Baker Mayfield or Joe. By the way, when I'm looking at this, I feel like the old school, Wheel of Fortune where you're like picking your prizes. I'll take the trip to Hawaii. Nobody remembers that. Anyways, Marcus, which quarterback you picking?
I would actually prefer the gift certificate to service merchandise, if you would. You and I are probably the only ones who remember this. Anyway, I would lean toward Joe Burrow. I mean, neither one of these guys has a great matchup. I wouldn't have loved Baker Mayfield, even if he was 100. And I know he's supposed to go, but I know he's got some banged up ribs, so he might be a little bit tender going against that Steelers pass rush. Plus, the Browns do want to run the football. The Bengals might not have a choice but to throw it a ton because that's what they do. So I would give Burrow the edge here.
And Christina wants to know, T.Y. Hilton or Christian Kirk, bad week. I have so many players on a bye. This happens. You know what? And might as well get it all out of the way in Week 6. I'm going to go with T.Y. Hilton. He had 10 targets last week, but those 10 targets came from Phillip Rivers. It's like that episode of The Office where they're like, do you want a little bit of great pizza or a lot of bit of not so great pizza? It's like one of them is Pizza by Alfredo or Alfredo's Pizza Cafe. I always get them mixed up. But T.Y. Hilton should be pretty good for you. Will he be a fantasy hero this week? I don't know. But guess what? Python, they're good. There it is. It's time for Fantasy Heroes just for one day. Okay, wait, by the way, I will get us another ASCAP violation, so I got to stop singing right there. Who is a bounce back candidate, though? Somebody who has struggled last week who can come through for you. We already went through the second act where it looked like our hero has given up on crime fighting, but now he's back, or he or she is back. Kimmy, who do you got?
All right, James Robinson is going to be back this week going up against the Detroit Lions. Last week, not so hot of a performance, but regardless, James Robinson is good, and he should absolutely be started at the running back position, especially because of these bye weeks as well. He's had 2 rushing touchdowns this season. That's tied for the most among rookie running backs. And going up against the Lions, they've allowed 6 touchdowns to running backs this season. So I absolutely do think he is going to have some red zone opportunities. Earlier, I had mentioned that DJ Chark is going to be active. I said that may have him take a hit for Laviska Shenault, but regardless, DJ Chark is back. Even though he is back, James Robinson is not only utilized in the run game, but he's also utilized in the passing game, which goes ahead and boosts his fantasy stock and his value even more. So I absolutely think this is going to be a bounce back performance, and he will be a hero just for one more day. Did I get those lyrics right?
You did.
You did. Okay, very good. You remember Superman 2 when he renounced his powers and he just became human, and then he went to that diner and that dude just beat him up. You're like, oh yeah, this isn't right. This is not right. That was sort of Justin Jefferson last week, right? He went up against the Seahawks. We figured, hey, he's gonna ball out, and it just didn't happen. So now he's going to back. He's rebuilding the Fortress of Solitude. He's going to get his powers back, and now he's going to go to the diner, and it's going to be the Falcons, and he's going to whoop up on them. So I think this is a week to get him back in. We talked about how much we like Adam Thielen. Kirk Cousins is the guy that you might want to start. Justin Jefferson's going to go out, and he's going to look like a superhuman yet again this week.
You know what? I'm going to go with Cooper Kupp, and it seems like the Rams receivers are all the different Robins. There's a Damian Wayne, there's a Dick Grayson, there's Jason Todd, there's Tim Patrick, and you never know which one of these guys is going to save the day. But I'm going to go with Kupp in this matchup because he's He's had double-digit fantasy points in every game since week 1. He's had a touchdown in 2 out of the last 3 games. If I'm an optimist, I'm like, he had his huge 2-game touchdown streak snapped, and the 49ers have allowed the 3rd most fantasy points to wide receivers over the last couple of weeks. So I'm going to go with Cooper Kupp. And again, I'm trusting Jared Goff, and I know this is all going to blow up in my face, and that's what we do. But anyways, that was Fantasy Heroes. Hope you enjoyed it. And I'm still upset that when Kimmy's singing the lyrics of those songs, she's singing the Jacob Dylan Wallflowers version and not Bowie.
No,
and that really
I'm
hurts
doing Bowie. I love David Bowie. Do not come for me. This is not a Beastie Boys situation. Do not.
All right. Up next, there can be only one. We are going full Highlander and breaking down some of the most pressing questions about a high-end quarterback and a high-end running back. Plus, our favorite spot starts to fill in for your guys on a bye week. You're watching NFL Fantasy Game Day presented by Geico. Lamar Jackson last year likely won you a fantasy football trophy. This year hasn't been great. Not bad. Like, he hasn't been a disaster. But he hasn't been the superstar you thought he was going to be when you drafted him, maybe in the 2nd round, maybe in the 3rd round. Who knows? But anyways, welcome back to NFL Fantasy Game Day presented by Geico. And that, you know what, let's dive into that situation here, because Lamar Jackson has certainly not lived up to the expectations. So let's put him up against some quarterbacks and do a little bit of like an either or, like which one of these guys would you want to start? And Kim, I'll start with you. Kyler Murray, if you, for whatever reason, have both of these quarterbacks, would you prefer Kyler Murray over Lamar Jackson this week?
One, if you have both of these quarterbacks, can I please play in your league, or please have whatever strategy you did to have this? But if we were talking about Lamar Jackson going up against the Eagles or Kyler Murray going up against the Dallas Cowboys, I'm going to swing with Kyler Murray on this one. You heard at the beginning of the show, Marcus was talking about how good of a matchup this is for DeAndre Hopkins. Going up against the Cowboys, they've allowed 11 passing touchdowns this season. So Kyler Murray for me all day.
All right. What about Josh Allen? Yeah. Which one, Marcus? Kyle Allen or Lamar? Where are you going? What about Josh Allen, though? A little bit of a disappointing game last week. Who would you go with in this situation?
I should probably lean Josh Allen over Lamar Jackson this week. I just think that that's going to be potentially a high-scoring game on Monday against the Kansas City Chiefs, and Josh Allen, I think, is going to bounce back from last week's performance.
Kimmy, what if we were talking about Deshaun Watson with a pretty nice matchup against the Titans? Where are you going?
I was going to say, it's a really good matchup against the Titans, so I'm going to lean against Lamar Jackson again and go with Deshaun Watson on this one. His fantasy points, his yards, and his touchdowns have increased week by week, so I think Deshaun Watson is coming back to fantasy relevance.
What about Fitzmagic, Lamar Jackson, Marcus, go?
I'm going to go Lamar in this one. And I know Fitz has been great, but look, as you talked about, he can either be 6 touchdowns or 6 interceptions. I think Lamar is a more solid, stable floor, so I think I'm going to go with the steadier presence here.
Yeah, all right. It's disrespectful, but sure. No, I understand. You drafted Lamar Jackson. You likely picked up Ryan Fitzmagic off the waiver wire. Let's go move to the running back position. Todd Gurley has been playing pretty well this season. I think everything in Atlanta is gone. That's good, like as well as it could be expected. This week, though, what are we doing? If you have him or James Conner, Kimmy, where are you going?
Ooh, okay. Todd Gurley, James Conner. Todd Gurley, very touchdown dependent. James Conner's been good these last few weeks, so I'm going to side with Conner on this one. He's had 15-plus fantasy points in 3 straight games, and he's also had 18-plus touches in 3 straight games. So just because of that volume alone and him still being able to put up points, regardless of getting in the end zone, I'm going to rock with James Conner.
Hey, Marcus, you going to go with Todd Gurley or the Bengals RB1?
I'm going Todd Gurley here. They got the Vikings, which certainly is a better matchup than the Bengals going against the Colts. On top of it, we saw Gurley get a lot of targets last week, so maybe that continues and he picks you up some cheap points on receptions out of the backfield.
Kim, are you going to go with Devin Singletary over Todd Gurley this week?
No, I'm not. I'm going to go with Todd Gurley instead because Todd Gurley actually gets in the end zone and Devin Singletary not so much. So Todd Gurley for me on that one.
Marcus, earlier you were talking about Antonio Gibson. Is he a must-start over Todd Gurley this week?
I think he is. I think I would start him over Gurley. I talked about the targets. I mean, he seems more assured of getting targets than Todd Gurley is, and he's getting work down near the goal line, which is certainly helpful. So I think I would give him the edge over Gurley.
All right, I am setting my lineup now. Thank you for that. All right, time now for Fantasy Insurance presented by Geico. We've got 4 teams on a bye, the Seahawks, the Chargers, the Raiders, and the Saints. So let's talk about some spot starts. Marcus, if I need a quarterback, if I'm out Justin Herbert, who should I stream this week?
Matt Stafford is up there, and you had him on your list of QB starts this week. I had this situation where I have Russell Wilson in a league. He's on a bye, so I went and I was able to grab Stafford off the waiver wire. He's got a great matchup against the Jaguars, who have struggled against fantasy quarterbacks. They're giving up I think it's the 8th most fantasy points to quarterbacks this season. So this is an opportunity to get him in there. Hopefully he spreads the ball around his weapons and throws a couple of touchdown passes.
Kimmy, how about a fantasy running back I could play this week if Josh Jacobs was the guy I've been relying on?
So if you've been relying on a Josh Jacobs or Alvin Kamara, look for Myles Gaskin in this game against the Jets. The Jets are allowing a top 7 fantasy running back in 2 straight games. Myles Gaskin has actually been really productive the last few weeks. He's had 14-plus fantasy points in 3 of the last 4 games. So look to plug and play Myles Gaskin.
So I'm going to go with N'Keal Harry here at the wide receiver spot, just because, look, he has been pretty good, actually, when you look at the Patriots offense. He's starting to get a lot more targets there. He's got a pretty good matchup this week. I talked about Cam Newton and how he's a good start against the Denver Broncos. I think N'Keal Harry is going to see some opportunities as well. So if you need a wide receiver in a pinch, it's not a bad way to go.
I've mentioned Irv Smith a number of times already with Noah Fadden being out, but if you do need to stream a tight end, he really impressed me last week. It was a tough matchup. Seattle had not given up a lot of production to the tight end position this season, but Irv Smith came out, did pretty well, scored over 10 fantasy points. He ran 31 routes, which is pretty good, 5 targets, 4 receptions, but the Falcons have allowed the second most fantasy points per game to tight ends this season. So again, he's available in 99% of your league, so go ahead and pick him up. And that was Fantasy Insurance presented by Geico. Now, still to come, how worried should Clyde Edwards-Helaire managers be about Le'Veon Bell? And could CEH drop a statement game on Monday? Find out next, because we're tackling all of Week 6's burning questions on NFL Fantasy Game Day, presented by Geico. And there he is, Juju Smith-Schuster, warming up, getting ready to go. Our own Marcus Grant is reporting. Huge game in store for Juju. Breaking news, breaking on all platforms. Get him into your lineup today, and welcome back to NFL Fantasy Game Day presented by Geico. We've got some burning questions. I think that you answered the one about Juju Smith-Schuster. So, Marcus, let me start with you. Le'Veon Bell, not going to suit up this week for the Chiefs, but what do we think about Clyde Edwards-Helaire long-term? What should we do moving forward?
I think you sort of hang on and to see what the actual split is going to be when Le'Veon Bell is there for the Chiefs. I mean, we came into the season expecting that there was going to be some sort of division of labor between Clyde Edwards-Helaire and Damian Williams. Then Damian Williams opts out of the season, so all of a sudden CEH gets a huge workload. So this is going to go back possibly to what we thought it would be. So instead of getting 20 to 25 touches per game, that number probably dropped to somewhere between 12 and 15 touches per game. But maybe this allows him to be more efficient. They could throw him the ball, get him out in space, sort of let him work. I think there's still some value there. Obviously, it's not going to be the first round production that you were hoping you were getting, but I don't think it's time to just completely press the panic button and try to deal him away just because Le'Veon Bell shows up in Kansas City.
I 100% agree, and maybe this is just me being a CEH fangirl because I spent an early first-round pick on him. But even though Le'Veon Bell is joining this offense, we have to look at what he's done as a New York Jet. He has averaged 3.27 yards per rush with the Jets since 2019. That's the second fewest amongst all running backs. He's also been 53rd amongst running backs this season, only averaging 7 fantasy points. I understand that Adam Gase offense is incredibly different than what is happening in Kansas City. He has a very good quarterback in Patrick Mahomes. Andy Reid is an offensive genius. I completely understand that it is a completely different scenario. But like Marcus said, let's just wait and see how Le'Veon Bell plays into that offense before we hit the panic button on CEH. Yes, Le'Veon Bell is a very good running back, but I don't know if he's going to be as productive or as dominant as a lot of people assume.
Mike Garafolo reported on Good Morning Football Saturday that the Chiefs plan to use Le'Veon Bell and CEH in the backfield at the same time. So I think that goes to your point, Kim. We don't know how they're going to use them, so hold on to both of these guys, and if you were able to pick up Le'Veon Bell in the last couple of weeks, then you're probably very fortunate right now. But people who have Terry McLaurin, not so fortunate. Earlier this week, you think about at first blush, you're like, Giants, cool, like give up a lot of points. But then you're like, yeah, James Bradbury shuts down a lot of people. And I remember this in particular because he did a great job against Allen Robinson a couple of weeks ago. So, Marcus, how concerned should we be about Terry McLaurin this week?
I think we should be concerned. I think there's a lot of reasons to sort of be concerned. James Bradbury is one of them in the way he's been shutting down wide receivers, but I'm also still just concerned about the quarterback situation there. I know we keep holding on to this idea that because DJ Moore had a good season last year with Kyle Allen that maybe things are going to be okay, but let's also take into effect that the catch rate for both DJ Moore and Curtis Samuel was not great. So McLaurin may end up seeing a lot of targets from Kyle Allen, but will they be quality targets? So this is a week I'm keeping a very close eye on how Washington tries to get him the football because it could have an impact on how I view Terry McLaurin going forward.
Right, and I completely understand of why we're kind of a little bit skeptical of this, but we also have to look at that quarterback switch last week and the defense that they were against. They played the Rams, and they only picked up 26 yards. Terry McLaurin did. And that quarterback change was really tough because the Rams went and sacked them 8 times. So that meant bad things for that entire offense. I think going up against the Giants, their passing defense is giving up almost 8 yards per pass attempt. So I think it's a little bit different and a little bit more favorable. I completely understand why we're a little bit panicked about Terry McLaurin, but I really am crossing my fingers that this better matchup is going to prove that he's still fantasy relevant.
So I feel like I have to play a little bit of fantasy defense here because I'm going up against Terry McLaurin in my league of record. I have him in my second city league. If I bench him and he goes off, I get burned doubly. But do I just take the risk? Because if he, I don't know, I hate this. Why did I even pick this player? Anyway, it doesn't matter. Anyways, that's going to be it for that. That's our burning questions. But check this out. After the break, because we're going to take a break right now, it's going to be Sunday Fun Day. Whoa, 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 whoa. Air horns. Our must starts and sleepers will have you turn it up to 11. Stick around. More air horns, please, because this is NFL Fantasy Game Day presented by Geico. Hit the air horns one more time. And there he is, Teddy Bridgewater, huge fan. Disappointed he, didn't sign. Well, whatever. We got Nick Foles. I don't care that much. But this is going to be a pivotal contest this week. The 3-2 Carolina Panthers going up against the 4-1 Chicago Bears. David Montgomery's in the mix. Does Mike Davis take a step back? There's so many interesting storylines here. Can we trust DJ Moore? Allen Robinson? All right, time now for 15 minutes to kick off, presented by Geico. Here are the notable Week 6 inactives and actives. Running back situation looking a little bleak. Dalvin Cook is out. Melvin Gordon is out. But Phillip Lindsay returns. Alexander Madison will be a really good start as well, going up against the Atlanta Falcons, who've allowed the second most fantasy points to running backs over the last 2 weeks. Good news on the wide receiver front. Odell Beckham Jr., DJ Chark, and Julio. He's back. Devontae Adams also expected to play this week, as is Chris Godwin. And that was 15 minutes to kickoff, presented by Geico. Adam Rank here, Kim Chex, Marcus Grant, and way over there, Michael F. Florio, who's been answering all of your fantasy questions. And Mike, who is the one player you're being asked about the most here on this Sunday?
There's been a lot of Odell Beckham Jr. questions this week. I don't know if it's the illness. I think it's a combination of the illness and the matchup against the Steelers. I think a lot of people are still afraid of the Steelers secondary when this year they've actually been in the top 5 in fantasy points allowed to receivers. Some players I said I would use over him were Godwin, Julio Jones, Marquise Brown. But then some players I said I would use Odell over were both Rams wide receivers, DJ Moore, Tim Patrick. So just a ton of Odell questions today.
Hey, Mike, let me ask you real quick, though, before we get to the fan questions. Did anybody ask you if you would start Tyler Boyd over Terry McLaurin?
I don't think so, but I have Terry McLaurin higher. I'm just a sucker for his upside.
Dadgummit, if you're wrong. No, listen, let's go to the fan questions right now. Take a look at those. What's the first one coming in? Chase Edmonds or Miles Sanders? Kim, which way are you going to go in this one?
Ooh, I like your point, Logan. Dallas D is garbage. Baltimore's D is not. Yeah, so go with Chase Edmonds. I think you answered your own question. Chase Edmonds all the way.
Yeah, you can kind of figure out which way Logan was leaning. TJ Hawkinson or Robert Tonyan, Marcus?
I think I go with Big Bob here. Even with Devontae Adams back, I think he has proven himself. And plus, there's still no Alan Lazard. MVS is mostly a field stretcher, so Tanyan can work underneath. I think I like him this week.
All right. Hope that helps, Ricky. Brandon Ayuk or Devonta Freeman? Which way are you going, Mike?
I'm going to go with Freeman there. I really don't like the matchup for Ayuk. The Rams have allowed the fewest yards and touchdowns to wide receivers this season, so I'm going to take the probably boring but safe points out of Devonta Freeman.
All right, savvy on that. Good luck, Dan. And Brett wants to know Odell Beckham Jr., Julio Jones, or Will Fuller. Oh, my gosh. The book tells you to go with Julio. I don't know how I'm sitting Will Fuller. And this, I can just go ahead and congratulate. No, go Julio. Fine. Give me the rest of your lineup, Brett. This isn't fair. Julio. You got to go Julio because Brandon Cooks got a lot of production last week. We really never know. There's going to be a lot of opportunity for Julio. Whatever. I'm going Julio. I don't care. But guess what? That doesn't matter because time now for Sunday Fun Day. And we're going to be talking about which players are going to pop off this week. What up? All right, Florio, who's your Sunday Fun Day player?
I'm going with Devontae Adams. Welcome back. I think he's just going to come back into our fantasy lives in this matchup against the Bucs, where I think it could be a little bit of a high-scoring affair between these two legendary quarterbacks. And I think Adams is going to remind everyone, like, hey, the one game I was healthy this year, I was the top player in fantasy. Look, I am still this guy. I just expect big things, and I'm so happy to be able to get him back into my fantasy lineups.
Speaking of someone I expect big things from and who has continued to show us big things all season, it's Mike Davis. Yes, Christian McCaffrey is still out. Mike Davis is the #1 running back for the Carolina Panthers. This was a really fun stat that Adam Rink and I talked about last week. Mike Davis is the second best guy in fantasy football amongst the running back position, only behind Alvin Kamara. Now, he is truly not a backup running back anymore. I know that the Chicago Bears have not allowed a top 15 fantasy running back this season, but I fully think that he is the guy to do it today.
Well, we're spending a lot of time talking about Julio Jones and whether or not you should play him, but let's not forget the guy on the other side. Calvin Ridley has been balling out all season long. He starts today as the wide receiver 3, 485 yards, 4 touchdowns, and he gets to pick on that Vikings secondary. So with Julio, without Julio, Calvin Ridley has been balling out, and I think he's going to continue to have a huge week, and I think he's going to be your top scorer this week.
I'm going to go with Kenny Golladay, and the Jags have allowed close to 500 passing yards to wide receivers in the last 2 games, giving up a lot of... That was a little rude to my friends down in Duval County, but I like it. Thank you, Zach. I appreciate the air horns. By the way, Kenny Golladay has scored in every game he's played this season. I mean, it's 2 games, but every game otherwise. Let's look at our favorite quarterback matchups for week 6. Kim, I'm going to throw it to you. Who do you got?
I really like Kirk Cousins this week going up against the Atlanta Falcons. One, I like it because Kirk Cousins has had 2+ passing touchdowns, in 2 of the last 3 games. But this matchup is the thing that I love. It's a very favorable matchup because the Falcons have allowed the most fantasy points per game to quarterbacks, averaging 30 fantasy points. They've allowed 300+ passing yards in all 5 games this season. They've allowed a top 12 fantasy quarterback in 4 of 5 games this season, and they've allowed a top 3 fantasy quarterback in 3 of 5 games this season. So the stats alone, all the stats I just rambled off, stats alone go to show that Kirk Cousins does have a really good matchup against the Falcons and should ball out this Sunday.
So in some sort of weird Freaky Friday-like occurrence, I'm talking about Patrick Mahomes instead of Kimmy Chex. So I don't know how that happened, but here we are.
What's happening?
Look, I mean, 1, he's Patrick Mahomes, but 2, he's got the Buffalo Bills this week. And, in the past, we looked at this matchup and thought, oh, it's the Bills. Like, maybe we should, double check and ensure if we want to do this. But the Bills have really been vulnerable against fantasy quarterbacks. They've given up the 5th most points per game to the position. And so with Mahomes already balling out this year, this is a great matchup for him on Monday.
Marcus, I'm going to go with a former Bill here and a fellow red-bearded man in Ryan Fitzpatrick against the Jets. He is currently the QB7 right now. I don't think enough people realize that. He has scored 21 fantasy points or more in 4 straight games, and the Jets have really only played 2 bigger name quarterbacks so far this year in Josh Allen, Kyler Murray, and both went off against them. So in what is, a revenge game as Fitzpatrick goes around the AFC East, I think you start him with confidence this week.
Every game's a revenge game for Ryan Fitzpatrick, but I'm going to go with Ryan Tannehill. Oh, I'm sorry. Pause for the air horns. My bad. Listen, ever since he took over, there it is. Oh, I love it. Thank you so much. Ever since he took over as a starting quarterback for the Tennessee Titans, he has been the QB3, trailing only Lamar Jackson and Dak Prescott. This season, he's had at least 21 fantasy points in 4 consecutive games, 2+ touchdown passes in 3 of his last 4 games. All right, let's talk about the running back position. Marcus, why don't you lead us off here?
Going to start with David Montgomery. I mean, he's got what is statistically the best matchup on paper of any running back this week going against that Carolina Panthers run defense. They've been just pretty awful. As good as they have been against the pass and against opposing quarterbacks, they have been that bad against the run. Throw in the fact that since Tariq Cohen went down with a season-ending injury, Montgomery is getting more targets. He's being a part of the passing game a whole lot more. So this is a week. Look, the arrow is trending up on David Montgomery, and this is the time to kind of think of him as certainly a high-end RB2, maybe even a low-end RB1, depending on what he can do this week.
Yeah, I love that call, Marcus. And another running back that I love this week is James Robinson. I know the last 2 weeks he hasn't really lived up to our expectations, but this is a get-right matchup against the Lions, who are allowing the 4th most fantasy points per game to running backs and the most rushing yards per game to the position. So I really like Robinson on the ground, and he's been getting used more in the passing game as of late as well. I think he has an opportunity to put up massive fantasy numbers in week 6.
Florio, this is why I love you. I was hyping up James Robinson earlier, so thank you for backing me up on this one. But I want to talk about another guy with a first name that starts with a J. This time it's Jonathan Taylor going up against the Cincinnati Bengals. Now, I know Jonathan Taylor, he's been good. He hasn't had a breakout crazy performance yet, but he's been pretty decent. He's had 75+ scrimmage yards or a touchdown in every single game this season. Going up against the Bengals, they have allowed 1 rushing touchdown to running backs in 4 of 5 games this year. So I really do think Jonathan Taylor is poised for, 1, a favorable matchup, but 2, for getting in the end zone and getting you some fantasy points.
I like that pick with Jonathan Taylor. Sorry, I was checking my lineups. There's so many great calls here. I want to make sure that I'm listening to all of you and making sure I'm making the right lineup decisions. I was just putting Alexander Madison into a lineup, of course, with Dalvin Cook out this week. The Falcons have allowed the 2nd most fantasy points to running backs over the last couple of games. Or last 2 games, I should say specifically. And you know what? Madison is this kind of player that when you watch him on tape, you're like, gosh, if he had his own opportunity to be a lead back, he'd be an excellent player. So now that he's got a chance, I'm going to get him into my lineup. Let's do the wide receiver position. Florio, can you start us off here?
Yeah, I'm going with A.J. Brown of the Tennessee Titans. Rank, you were talking of Tannehill, who I really like, and his number 1 weapon is A.J. Brown. And I know he had a down week 1 and then missed a bunch of weeks, so I think he kind of had to remind everyone, like, hey, remember what I did in the second half of last year? Like, I am a wide receiver 1 in fantasy football. He had the volume last week to go with it, so I'm expecting more big things out of A.J. Brown this week and just going forward.
All right, Marcus, listen closely because this is not Freaky Friday. I'm Kimmy Chex, and I'm going to talk about a Kansas City Chief. And this time it's Mecole Hardman going up against the Buffalo Bills on Monday. He's had a touchdown in 2 of the last 3 games. And this matchup against the Bills is really good. Sorry, Michael Florio. I know the Bills are your team, but we're going to whip your butt because the Bills have allowed 3 top 12 fantasy wide receivers in the last 3 games. Also, this means good things for Mecole Hardman because Sammy Watkins is out. He's not playing because of an injury. So in those 3 games without Sammy Watkins back in 2019, Mecole Hardman had over 10 fantasy points per game in all 3 of those. So hopefully really good things ahead for Mecole Hardman.
I was really afraid that I was going to look in the mirror and see Lindsay Lohan's face staring back at me. So this is a relief. I'm going to go with Will Fuller this week. And I know it was Brandon Cooks that had the big week last week. But nonetheless, Fuller has still been getting consistent targets when he's been on the field and he's been healthy. And so I expect that to continue this week against a Titans secondary that maybe isn't quite as strong as it has been in years past. They are giving up points. They're giving up yards to the wide receiver position. So I think you stay the course with Will Fuller and expect him to have a pretty big week.
Are we starting him over Julio? Like, that is the question of the day so far. That one still haunts me, but I think I've made my decision I'm going to go with it. And I've made my decision to go with Jamison Crowder. This player has been besmirched too often because he plays for the New York Jets. It's not his fault, because in every game he's played this season, he's played 3. He's had at least 10 targets, 7 receptions, 100 receiving yards. And you're like, well, what about Joe Flacco? Yeah, Joe Flacco last week. He was still fine. So you're over it. Listen, Miami has allowed the 8th most receiving yards per game to wide receivers this season. So Jamison Crowder is going to need to start for you. So now let's talk about some sleepers. And this is actually another player that I've been rushing through right now. If I seem distracted, it's because I'm trying to get this player on to every team that I have. Kimmy, who's the player who I'm talking about?
The player is DeAndre Swift. During the commercial break, I was on Twitter answering questions, and Florio tweeted, there is still enough time to get DeAndre Swift in your starting lineup, so go do it. He's had 2 red zone targets this season. That's the most amongst Detroit running backs, and 8 red zone snaps this season. Again, second most against Detroit running backs. Really good matchup. DeAndre Swift, get him in your lineup right now.
I want to go to Michael P. Ryan, and I know it's not a name that people have immediately coming to mind, but since Le'Veon Bell is not in New York anymore, and look, as much as we love Frank Gore, at some point, if you're the Jets, you got to see what you have in this young player back there. He's got a good matchup against the Dolphins. We're giving up a lot of fantasy points per game to the running back position, 6th most in the league. So this is an opportunity for P. Ryan to get on the field, maybe catch some passes as well, and make some plays.
Irv Smith Jr. is a sleeper I really like this week. Last week, he saw a season high in routes ran, snaps, targets, receptions, yards, and it couldn't have come at a better time. He gets the Atlanta Falcons this week, who are allowing the 2nd most fantasy points and the most touchdowns to tight ends. I'm starting Irv Smith in a number of leagues, including over my preseason darling Tyler Higbee. So I think if you're struggling at the tight end position this week, Irv is a name you can get off the waiver wire and plug into your lineup.
Yeah, that is somebody I've been talking about a lot today, especially with Noah Fant out this week. And anytime that we can find a tight end, Mike, anytime that you can find, because every year we go into this thinking like, oh my God, there's so many great tight ends. And then by the midpoint of the season, there's 3 guys that we can trust. But let me tell you one thing about Tim Patrick, because I did want to say he's had at least 14 fantasy points in consecutive games. The Patriots have allowed 7 receiving touchdowns to wide receivers this season. That's tied for the 4th most in the NFL, and Drew Lock is going to be the quarterback today, which should help him out. I think Drew Lock's a pretty good quarterback. I think that, he didn't really get an opportunity to go show himself. This Drew Lock, that's what I'm talking about. But anyways, how are you guys feeling? We feeling good about this week's show? I thought this was a good one.
Yeah, I thought so.
It was decent. It was good. But it's time to wrap. It's time to go watch football. Come on, let's go.
Thanks, everybody. This was NFL Fantasy Game Day presented by Geico. Good luck this week. We'll see you on Tuesday.